from a fire official earlier who said it moved so quickly they had very little time to tell folks in the community to evacuate, many of them leaving with the shirts on their backs.
Adrian brought us on the scene for us. Be careful out there. Thank you very, very much. And to our viewers, thanks very much for watching. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. Erin Burnett Out Front starts right now.
Out front next, Pence's former chief of staff testifies. Mark Short, now believed the highest-ranking official from Trump's White House to cooperate with the federal investigation into January 6th. He will be out front. Plus, quote, medieval hell, dripping in blood, surrounded by carnage. Those are the words of President Biden, words we've never heard him say in this context before. He's talking about President Trump's refusal to act during the insurrection. And air raid sirens tonight in Taiwan. A chilling sound as China threatens the U.S. if Speaker Nancy Pelosi goes to Taiwan. Will China really act, or is it all bluster? Let's go out front. And good evening, I'm Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, a Trump White House insider testifies. Tonight, CNN has learned that former Vice President Mike Pence's chief of staff, Mark Short, testified before a federal grand jury investigating January 6th. He is believed to be the highest-ranking official in Trump's White House to cooperate with the federal investigation. Now, in just a moment, I am going to speak with Mark Short live. He is a valuable witness. On the day before the January 6th rally, he grew concerned about President Trump's attack on Pence. He warned the Secret Service. And here's a portion of his testimony to the January 6th Select Committee.
Concern was for the vice president's security, and so I wanted to make sure the head of the vice president's Secret Service was aware that that likely, as these disagreements became more public, that the president would lash out in some way.
And on January 6th, Short was with the vice president, who had to be rushed to safety when an angry mob of Trump supporters was trying to hunt him down for refusing to overturn the election. This all comes as we're learning that on January 7th, the day after the mob of extremists was calling for Pence's head, Trump didn't want to condemn the violence. Not only did he wait hours in the face of pleas from everyone around him to condemn it, but the January 6th committee is now sharing this new image. This is a draft of the speech that Trump would eventually give on January 7th. You can see Trump crossing out a number of lines in his trademark black Sharpie, including the third graph, where he refused to call for his supporters who stormed the Capitol to be prosecuted. The line that he crossed out was, I am directing the Department of Justice to ensure all lawbreakers are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We must send a clear message, not with mercy, but with justice. Legal consequences must be swift and firm. He crossed it out. And in case there's anyone questioning who actually made these damning edits with the black Sharpie, here is the former president's daughter, Ivanka.
As you can see throughout the document, there are lines crossed out. There are some words added in. Do you recognize the handwriting?
It looks like my father's handwriting.
Well, there you have it. It looks like her father's handwriting right there in black and white. So Trump refused for hours to condemn the rioters who were ransacking the Capitol, threatening his vice president's life on January 6th. The next day, crossing out those crucial lines. Evan Perez is out front live in Washington tonight. And Evan, what more are you learning about Mark Short's testimony before the federal grand jury, which of course is related to the Department of Justice investigation?
That's right, Aaron. We know that Mark Short appeared on Friday for several hours before the federal grand jury that has been investigating the efforts to block certification of Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 election and of seating these group of fake electors. This is a scheme that was thought of by the former president's campaign and some of his lawyers. Now, what we don't know is exactly what he was asked during this grand jury testimony, but we know that Mark Short was there for a lot of things. You mentioned not only the fact that he was by the vice president's side on January 6th, but perhaps even more importantly, on January 4th, he was in a meeting in the White House where the former President Trump and John Eastman, one of his lawyers, were trying to persuade the vice president, the then vice president, that he had the power to not certify the election results, that he had the power to bypass the Constitution, essentially, and try to keep Donald Trump in the White House. So those are some very, very important observations that Mark Short would have been a part of, and that would be very valuable for the prosecutors who are looking into not only the violence that happened on January 6th, but also the efforts that went into trying to keep Donald Trump in power and, of course, inspired the violence on January 6th, Aaron.
Evan, thank you very much. And now, as promised, I want to go to Mark Short, the former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence. So, Mark, thank you so much for coming on and speaking to the extent that you are able to. I know, Evan's talking about that you testified last week on Friday under subpoena in front of that federal grand jury investigating January 6th. What were you asked to testify about, as broadly speaking as you can tell me?
Well, Aaron, I can confirm that I did receive a subpoena for the federal grand jury, and I complied with that subpoena. But under advice of counsel, I really can't say much more than that.
All right, I understand. Now, are you able to tell me, was that your first and only time appearing before the grand jury, or had there been others?
That was my only appearance before the grand jury.
And one other question on this. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that other Pence aides, including counsel Greg Jacob, also testified. Do you know if he did or any other aides also for the vice president?
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on what others on the team have had to testify or not regarding subpoenas and what they've testified to.
So it is obviously significant that you were there, and I understand your advice of counsel. But there is news from the committee today that is relevant to all this. It's what I just laid out a little bit that shows not just on January 6th, the president's refusal for hours to condemn the violence, but on January 7th, his refusal to condemn the violence at the Capitol, crossing out key lines in a draft speech, including legal consequences must be swift and firm. He crossed that out. I want it to be very clear, you do not represent me. He crossed that out. He crossed out the rioters belong in jail. Now, Mark, you were there. You were there with the vice president when people were chanting to hang him and talking about killing him. You worked with Trump for years. Why do you think he took these words out?
Well, Aaron, I think that on that day, certainly there were probably some people who foolishly got caught up in the events that were happening on the 6th. But I think it's unfair to describe the rioters as patriots or merely expressing their First Amendment rights. And I think, as conservatives, I think just a couple months before, we were very clearly calling for the prosecution of those in Black Lives Matter protests who had destroyed businesses and taken lives. And I think if we're consistent, then I think it applies in both cases. And I think that if you heard Vice President Pence's remarks when the Senate reconvened that night, he very clearly called that all involved should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
He did, yes, he did. Again, you were there. And one of the moments that really stood out to me that we just heard for the first time was from an anonymous security official who testified before the January 6th committee about what was actually happening with some of the most highly trained security professionals in the world, right? The Secret Service, who were with the Vice President of the United States that day. Let me play it.
The members of the VP detail at this time were starting to fear for their own lives. There was a lot of yelling, a lot of very personal calls over the radio. So it was disturbing. I don't like talking about it, but there were calls to say goodbye to family members, so on and so forth. It was getting, for whatever the reason was on the ground, the VP detail thought that this was about to get very ugly.
Mark, when you heard that testimony about the Secret Service agents who were with you and the vice president that day, that some of them were calling their family members to say goodbye because they thought it could end that way, what went through your mind as the person who was there with the vice president?
Well, to be honest, Aaron, I was greatly skeptical. Our Secret Service did a phenomenal job that day, and their job was made more complicated, candidly, by the fact that the Capitol had been breached, and truthfully, that they wanted to evacuate the vice president, but it's been covered the vice president didn't want the image of a 15-car motorcade fleeing the hallmark of democracy for the world to see, and so they had a lot of challenges. But I never witnessed that from any of the Secret Service agents who were there. And in fact, I think that really Tim, who was our lead agent, and Max, the deputy, really should be commended for an amazing job they did in securing the vice president and his family and all of us without anybody getting injured in that incident. But I candidly think that, you know, if the rioters had gotten any closer, likely there would have been a massacre in the Capitol. It wouldn't have been Secret Service agents, though, who would have been the ones harmed. And I think that
Well, it would have been you. It would have been the vice president.
No, I think it would have been the rioters who the Secret Service would have opened fire upon. I think that was the biggest risk in that moment. It was not Secret Service agents really feeling scared for their lives. I didn't witness any of that. They handled the situation with remarkable skill. I think the concern would have been actually that if they'd gotten any closer, then those who were in the Capitol would have been. The
massacre would have been of the rioters.
Yes, that's right.
Do you understand the sentiment? I understand, obviously, you know, they're brave and courageous actions. I totally understand what you're saying with that. But we're all human beings.
Sure.
That there was that fear and that moment of thinking that they may not go home.
Did
you feel that yourself at all?
No, I didn't witness that fear in any of the Secret Service agents who were there. I really didn't.
So Vice President Pence had a speech scheduled for tonight in which he was going to say, and now, this was delayed because of weather, but one of the things that we know he was going to say was, some people may choose to focus on the past, but I believe conservatives must focus on the future. You know, this isn't a pretty clear, although perhaps oblique, but a clear reference to President Trump. Why does he think that message is the one to send now?
Well, I think actually that's always been consistent with him. Going back to 2010 when we had won 63 seats in the House and took back the House, he was the one arguing with House leadership. We need to have a positive vision for the American people. He did the same in 2014 when he took back the Senate. And in 2016, candidly, he was often arguing on the campaign trail, we need to lay out our vision for what we will do. And I think that he often cites the biblical verse that where there is no vision, the people perish. And that's who Mike Pence is. And he believes we should offer an optimistic vision for the American people. I know there's some in Washington who feel like, look, this is about them. It's not about us, and we're going to win anyhow. And that could be true, Aaron. But I think that he's always advocated we owe it to the American people to say what we are for. And we need to be looking forward, and that'll not only maximize our political gains, but it's also what we owe the American people is to lay out for them what we will do if put back in charge.
To take it back to Washington, where you just referred, Matt Gaetz, obviously very loyal Trump ally at this point, fired at the vice president, the former vice president today, and the comments that Vice President Pence was making. Here's what Matt Gaetz said.
Our America is proudly ultra MAGA, not some low energy roadside rhino safari. On that note, let me just say what everybody here knows. Mike Pence will never be president. Nice guy, not a leader.
Mark?
Well, I don't know if Mike Pence will run for president in 2024, but I don't think Matt Gaetz will have an impact on that. In fact, I'd be surprised if he was still voting. It's more likely he'll be in prison for child sex trafficking by 2024. And I'm actually surprised that Florida law enforcement still allows him to speak to teenage conferences like that. So I'm not too worried about Matt Gaetz. Thanks.
All right, Mark Short, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Aaron.
All right, and now I want to bring in Ryan Goodman, co-editor-in-chief of Just Security, an online legal site closely covering January 6th and the investigation, and Alyssa Farah-Griffin, former Trump White House communications director. Okay, thanks to both of you. Ryan, let's start with Mark Short, highest-ranking White House official we know of to testify before the federal grand jury. So this is the Department of Justice. We know he also testified before the January 6th committee. Doing so Friday, he said it's the only time he's done so. How significant is the development?
It's hugely significant. This is the first time that we know of any White House official actually testifying before the grand jury for the Justice Department's investigation. And it's Mark Short, so it goes right into the inner circle. And the Wall Street Journal is also reporting that Greg Jacob, the chief counsel to Vice President Pence, and that the prosecutors had a line of questioning, which was about this January 4th meeting in the Oval Office. That's going right to the heart of it. That's very legally significant because it's the moment, as Evan said, where Eastman is confronted and says in front of Trump, I admit it's not legal what I'm advocating.
And Alyssa, you know what's amazing? This meeting, obviously Mark Short was there. He was there every step of the way, right? I mean, you know how important he was. How important could his testimony be just in terms of his proximity and presence in every meeting?
Yeah, and I've emphasized this when there's, this push that Vice President Pence himself should either testify, whether it's January 6th or the grand jury. Mark Short is his eyes and ears, and him being greenlit by the former vice president is them cooperating. It's Pence World cooperating. He would have been there. This, to me, indicates they're looking into the DOJ pressure campaign, the Eastman efforts, and it was reported by the Wall Street Journal that they were asking about Rudy Giuliani and some of the theories that he was pushing.
Right.
But I do remember in those final weeks, I'd left the White House, but I still talked to a lot of Pence World, the overwhelming pressure that was put on the former vice president to take up one of these terrible, wrong legal theories.
Right.
And thank God, I have to say, because Mark Short was just on, thank God it was Mark Short that was there, that it was Vice President Pence and it was Greg Jacobs, because again, Donald Trump is likely going to be a candidate again. He may very well be president again, and it will not be men of that caliber and integrity and patriotism who will be with him.
No, that's not going to be the VP, obviously. I mean, I don't mean specifically, I mean generally, Ryan, either, right? It's not going to be that a caricature of a person. So, to this context, the January 6th, the January 7th speech that the then president gave, that he crossed out the crucial lines. That, what does that say to you? And it's obvious it was him, but his own daughter saying, well, yeah, that looks like his handwriting.
Yeah, it's significant and it's legally significant. I think this would be important evidence in the hands of prosecutors. They would be able to say, look, this is further evidence that Trump at that time was supportive of what the rioters did. He did not want them to face legal accountability, and it therefore is consistent with a lot of the testimony that we've heard saying the exact same thing.
So, Alyssa, here's the thing. This is something you would have seen so many times and experienced so many times yourself in your role. One of the lines he crossed out that addressed the rioters specifically was, I want to be very clear, you do not represent me, you do not represent our movement. He crossed that out. You have been there when he went and those discussions about tweets or statements. Take us inside that.
Yeah, so Trump is someone who speaks off the cuff when he's speaking, but written statements, whether it's a tweet or something that you put out as a press release, he actually puts quite a bit of time and thought into. I was in the Oval with him when he would dictate a tweet and say, capitalize this, use this word, don't use this. So he's actually quite deliberate in the language. I remember a terrible time during the social justice protests of the summer of 2020 when he did when the looting starts, the shooting start tweets. And I went hours and hours trying to get him to walk it back. And he was very deliberate. He says what he means to. And taking that out was because he believes those are very special people. He had said that the day prior. He believes they're his people and he wants them to stay with him. He knew what he was doing by eliminating it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you very much, Alyssa. Ryan, thank you. And next, it may be the biggest legal threat to Trump himself. I'm talking about the Georgia DA investigation into Trump's efforts to overturn the election in Georgia. There are major developments in that probe tonight. Plus, President Biden tearing into Trump for refusing to act on January 6th.
Donald Trump lacked the courage to act.
And protesters swarming Indiana's state capitol, where conservative lawmakers are now pushing one of the strictest abortion bans in the United States.
I'm Julia Chatterley at the New York Stock Exchange, and this is CNN.
The Opus 14 is a very interesting watch. It was the 14th watch in the Opus series, which came out once a year from Harry Winston. Really idiosyncratic, large, extremely mechanically complicated watches. They were always collaborations with known independent watchmakers, and they were all highly complicated watches that did something that no other watch could do. The Opus 14 is a watch that looks a lot like a jukebox on the wrist. It shows the time in 2 different time zones, but it does so by making what looks like a little record rise up out of a jukebox and rotate underneath a record player. It's very much a love it or hate it watch. I mean, I loved it just because I thought to myself, this is completely insane, who does this? There was something super, super appealing about it. If you want something that is really, really different and that's going to be a conversation piece, it's one of the most interesting watches out there.
I'm Linda Kincaid in Atlanta, and this is CNN.
Tonight, big developments in the Georgia grand jury's criminal investigation into former President Trump's efforts to overturn that state's election. A federal judge earlier shutting down Republican Congressman Jody Hice's request to quash a subpoena to appear before that grand jury. So Hice is a vocal election denier. He's been pushing lies about his state's election ever since Joe Biden won.
Not for 1 second am I convinced that Joe Biden won the state of Georgia.
I don't believe, not for one moment, that Georgia is blue, but for election irregularities and fraudulent activity.
It comes as that same grand jury heard recorded testimony today from Georgia's Republican Governor Brian Kemp. Kemp, you know, refused to go along with Trump's lies about Georgia's election, despite Trump directly pressuring him to do so, and instead certified the election 2 separate times, right? Because they audited, they rechecked, both times for Biden. Out front now, Norm Eisen, former counsel to House Democrats during Trump's first impeachment trial. Norm, a few crucial questions here. First, you have praised the deliberateness and speed of the investigation in Fulton County, Georgia, saying that all signs point to District Attorney Fani Willis seriously considering a criminal charge for Trump. Ty Cobb, former attorney for the former president, agrees that this is the area, the place where you may get a criminal charge for the president if you get one. How crucial could Kemp and Hice's testimony be?
Kemp is the more crucial of the two, Aaron, although Hice is important. The reason Kemp is so important, December 5th, direct Trump outreach. We've since learned from the January 6th committee how important this phony electors scheme is. Well, guess what? According to the reporting of that December 5th, 2020 call, Donald Trump asked Kemp to work with the Georgia legislature to throw out the Trump electors and to throw out the Biden electors, rather, and put in the Trump ones. So that goes right to the heart of the scheme that I believe the DA is investigating. Hice is an election denier. He also had contacts with Donald Trump, and he may have important information as well about that plan, including conversations in the White House or outside conversations. So both important, Kemp more so.
Okay, and those are obviously, significant victories for the DA and the investigation, right? To get that subpoena to go forward for Heiss. Kemp's testifying, right? It's moving ahead. And yet, Willis's investigation did hit a snag today. A Georgia judge blocked her from investigating State Senator Burt Jones. He's one of the alleged fake electors involved in a scheme to subvert Georgia's election. So not going to be able to continue with the investigation into him specifically because he is the Republican nominee for lieutenant governor. And Willis, the district attorney here, hosted a campaign fundraiser last month for the Democrat who is going to face Jones in the general election. How much has she hurt her credibility, Norm, and possibly the case itself by doing that?
Aaron, I wrote with the Bush White House ethics czar. I was the Obama one, and a top Georgia expert saying that these types of political activities just are not a basis to disqualify in the normal case. And we've seen this over and over again. Equal issues were not a basis to disqualify members of Bob Mueller's staff, for example. Now, that being said, the judge saw it differently. He's bending over backwards. And, one thing you can't say after today is that this judge is biased. He's enhanced his own credibility. And this motion was also brought by 11 others, all defeated. The judge has wiped out everybody else's efforts. So the case will continue. Another prosecutor will pursue Mr. Jones or not. I think it's obviously not a great development for her, but for the most part, the case goes on, so does she.
Norm, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron.
And next, President Biden not holding back, reacting to the violence the nation witnessed on January 6th.
Brave law enforcement officers are subject to the medieval hell for 3 hours, dripping in blood, surrounded by carnage.
Why now? And a massive protest today, thousands surrounding the Indiana State House, filling its hallways as lawmakers consider a ban on nearly all abortions.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 80,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore CNN.com/impact. Click to take action.
Eurostar now wants to move past its pandemic struggles. It's moving ahead with a merger with the French and Belgian rail company Thalys, and it's launching new direct trains between London and Amsterdam. Jacques Damard wants to make sure the company learns lessons from the past and reshapes the travel sector's future.
Everybody is focusing on one thing, which is satisfying the customer expectation. At the very moment, there is a strong appetite, which may be a bit specific to this summer, which is the first one for 2 years with a great appetite to travel. But there are also a number of other positive and sustainable evolutions. So it is a mix, up to us now, to make that the plus are bigger than the minus.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source. travel the world, make sure the world travels with you. Check in, log on, and get connected with all of the latest developments at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels. Connected to your world.
We're here at the home of one of the FSB team. Was it your team that poisoned Navalny?
What do you want the world to know?
People are so exhausted. Just gonna help her carry this bag.
Scores of Taliban fighters, and just behind us, the U.S. Embassy. I'm the one who has to look them in the eye. Can I have your word? These people are depending on you. Now they're pressing in. They want desperately to tell their stories.
I'm Melissa Bell in Paris, and this is CNN.
Tonight, President Biden coming out with his sharpest rebuke ever, and he's doing it now, of former President Trump's failure to act on January 6th.
We saw what happened. The Capitol Police, the D.C. Metropolitan Police, other law enforcement agencies were attacked and assaulted before our very eyes, speared, sprayed, stomped on, brutalized, and lives were lost. And for 3 hours, the defeated former President of the United States watched it all happen as he sat in the comfort of the private dining room next to the Oval Office. While he was doing that, brave law enforcement officers were subject to the medieval hell for 3 hours, dripping in blood, surrounded by carnage. Police were heroes that day. Donald Trump lacked the courage to act.
Medieval hell, dripping in blood, surrounded by carnage. Caitlin Collins is out front from the White House. Caitlin, the president has condemned the January 6th attack, but never in language like we heard there.
And certainly not that forceful since these hearings have started on Capitol Hill. Of course, these hearings going through what led up to that day, but the most recent one, Aaron, last week, where it really detailed what the former president did and really did not do during those 3 hours as this attack was ongoing. And that's what Biden went after him directly for in these remarks, which we should note were two black law enforcement executives that he had recorded today, speaking to them, often talking about how the former president and his allies often talk about his great support for law enforcement. And the president today was kind of making that contrast, saying that if he's someone who supports law enforcement, it was law enforcement that day that went in to try to stop that attack, while Trump, of course, was sitting in the office right outside the Oval Office. And as President Biden put it today, sitting idly as that attack was happening. And so he went after him, and that line right there saying that he lacked the courage to act was probably the strongest one that you saw in the president's remarks today. And I should note, it did come after last Thursday when that hearing happened at night. That was the day that President Biden had tested positive for COVID-19. So previously, the White House has said he was paying attention, keeping an eye on the hearings, but really getting briefed by staff on what was going on. He was able to watch some of that, we're told, on Thursday night, and clearly it had an impression on him based on his remarks today. I will note the White House was asked today if he's asked for any kind of update from the Justice Department on where their thinking is. Of course, all eyes have kind of turned to Attorney General Merrick Garland in this. They said no, of course, that is up to the Justice Department to make that decision, not President Biden, but certainly a strong condemnation from President Biden for what President Trump did on that day.
Yeah, absolutely, Caitlin. It was amazing to see all the adjectives that the medieval hell, dripping in blood, surrounded by carnage. Obviously powerful words, and he chose to use them now. Caitlin Collins, thank you so much, as always, our chief White House correspondent. And I want to go now to Leon Panetta. He was the Secretary of Defense and Director of the CIA under President Obama. So, Secretary Panetta, I just went through some of those lines again. I mean, a lot of time was put into the word choice here. And it's sort of unforgettable, right? Medieval hell, dripping in blood, surrounded by carnage. Were you surprised by President Biden's choice of tone and timing that he is doing this now?
No, not really. I think President Biden is basically reflecting the attitude of a lot of people who saw what happened, saw what was presented by the January 6th committee, and basically identified what I think is something that that Joe Biden and Democrats have to do, which is to undermine any kind of attack on him with regards to law and order. When you see that President Trump did absolutely nothing for 4 hours while a criminal act was being conducted against the Capitol and people were dying and property was being destroyed, but did nothing, I don't think they have any grounds to talk about law and order with that kind of record.
Secretary, I want to ask you about another important story tonight, and that is China. Tonight threatening, quote, resolute and forceful measures. That's a direct quote. If Speaker Pelosi goes through with her proposed trip to Taiwan. If she does it, Secretary, as you know, this would make her the highest-ranking American lawmaker to go to Taiwan in 25 years. Chinese state media threatening and taking these threats further. The former editor of the state-run Global Times tweeting in part that China's response to a visit from Pelosi would entail, quote, shocking military response, and that China will restrain her and punish her. These are incredible words to use. Do you think they're bluffing, or is it possible that China responds with military action, Secretary?
Well, I happen to believe it is a very important principle for democracies to be able to have their people and their representatives visit whoever they want to visit, and that no dictatorship ought to determine what democracies can do. Having said that, obviously, China has decided to make this a sensitive situation. That shouldn't intimidate the United States or Speaker Pelosi. I don't think it will. Yeah. But one thing I think that is important right now is that the United States should speak with one voice. So I think it is important for Speaker Pelosi, the White House, the military, ought to come together and decide what approach is going to be taken.
And to your point there, obviously they haven't, at least to this point, right? And that's sort of what this has exposed. And I was pretty surprised, I'll say, Secretary, to hear this. President Biden, after Pelosi's going ahead with this trip, comes out and speaks, implies that the U.S. military has misgivings about Pelosi making the trip. He actually comes out and says this publicly. Here's what he said.
Mr. President, do you think it's a good idea for Speaker Pelosi to travel to Taiwan this summer?
Well, I think that the military thinks it's not a good idea right now, but I don't know what the status of it is.
Okay, so that was an honest answer. The military thinks it's not a good idea right now. Again, a pretty incredible, I don't want to use the word schism, but that they weren't on the same page. Pelosi was then asked about what Biden said, and she responded in this way, Secretary.
I think what the president was saying is maybe the military was afraid our plane would get shot down or something like that by the Chinese. I don't know exactly.
I mean, wow. Secretary, what do you make of this?
Well, frankly, as a former chief of staff, I think it's really as important that everybody get on the same talking points when it comes to something as important as the issue of whether the speaker ought to be allowed to visit Taiwan. That's a very important issue. And I think before everybody starts talking and trying to undermine each other in this process, I think the best course, frankly, is for them to sit down together and decide what the best approach is. I mean, if Speaker Pelosi decides she wants to go, then the White House ought to back her up and provide whatever safety precautions are necessary. If, on the other hand, they decide that somehow there's another approach that can be taken here, then so be it. But right now, the most important thing is not to look weak, but to look strong and speak with one voice.
Secretary Panetta, thank you very much, as always.
Thank you.
And next, outrage growing as Indiana lawmakers consider one of the strictest abortion laws in America. And I'm going to speak to the fiancée of an American captured in Ukraine. She just received a video of him. Her reaction tonight.
My name is Andy Ty Nguyen. I am a United States citizen.
I'm Richard Crest in New York, and this is CNN.
There is nowhere in Lysychansk that's safe.
Let me show you what the scene looks like. It's absolutely obliterated.
the force of that blast blowing out windows.
President Putin has been sending this message. He can hit this country anywhere, anytime.
Farmers are still working, even with the threat of Russian artillery that could land here.
Ukraine's message, please send more weapons.
I believe we have an opportunity to move towards hope because we are learning more about this criminal enterprise. My name is Lisa C. Williams. I'm a philanthropist and an advocate for survivors of human trafficking. When I look back over 22 years of when I first started working in this space, I was simply trying to find safe shelter for girls who were 10 and 11 years old who were being bought and sold on our streets. One of the things that I remember very vividly, it was a turning point in our fight for Rachel's Law, is the CNN special, Children for Sale. It took something like that documentary that was hosted by Jada Pinkett Smith to wake up people and for them to want to look at it and understand what we were saying to them. And that just gave us momentum. And we took that film and we took it all over Georgia and we galvanized people around a movement that we call the I Am Rachel movement to tell them about the safe harbor law that we were trying to get passed. And 83% of Georgians said, we agree that children are children and not the criminals.
When you take a step back and you see the Earth in its entirety, you understand that it's just an oasis in the cosmos. All around is nothing, no life, is blackness, emptiness. And there's this blue ball with everything we need to sustain human life and life in general, which is absolutely fragile. And it makes you want to cherish the Earth a little bit more. I'm Thomas Pesquet, I'm an astronaut for the European Space Agency. You can see a lot of the consequences of human activities from space. Some of them climate change, some of them just plain old pollution. It was definitely my experience of being in space and seeing it with my own eyes that made me want to advocate against climate change. I'm an ambassador for the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. We're trying to limit the production, the use of plastic, the production of waste, and so we came up with edible packaging, which is just such a fantastic and simple concept. We need foam to protect everything from shocks during launch into space. So what we did is we turned that foam into food. It's like gingerbread. Now our packaging is at the same time our source of food. It reduces the need to send cargo up. If we set ourselves on the right path, there's nothing we cannot do. We built that unbelievable facility in space. We're using it every day. I'm optimistic for the future. If we can make a space station fly, then we can save the planet.
Tonight, protesters were lined up outside the Indiana state capitol where lawmakers are debating one of the strictest abortion bans in the country. Alexander Field is out front in Indianapolis.
Thousands of demonstrators swarming Indiana's state capitol for the heated debate over a bill to ban abortion at any stage of pregnancy, with exceptions for some cases of rape, incest, and threats to the life of a mother.
Just judgment.
Fierce opposition to the bill coming now on both sides of the issue.
Indiana Right to Life's mission is to protect the right to life. Our opposition to this bill is because in its current state, it doesn't stack up to that mission.
Some arguing that the restrictions with Indiana's bill don't go far enough.
I'm asking the SB1 language be stripped and a bill be replaced with the language similar to HB 1282, which was a complete ban on abortion with no exceptions, no compromise, no regulation.
Others fighting to stop another state from denying care to women.
The proposed legislation politicizes what should be a private decision.
Indiana is the first state to call a special session to attempt to pass new laws restricting abortion in the wake of the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision. It leads the way for dozens of states with plans to pass similar bills. At least 12 states have already attempted to or enacted bans or severely restricted abortion procedures since Roe was overturned.
My body, my choice.
Indiana has become a safe haven of sorts for women seeking care they can't otherwise get.
We're already seeing people traveling from other states coming into Indiana for abortion care, as far away as Texas, but including states like Ohio and Kentucky. So Indiana is already trying to provide care that should be legal and accessible by these people in their own states.
Last month, a 10-year-old rape victim traveled from Ohio to Indianapolis for an abortion after her home state enacted a ban around the 6th week of pregnancy. The Indiana University physician who helped the child, Dr. Caitlin Bernard, drawing the ire of conservative media, some lawmakers, and the state's attorney general. Protesting Indiana's bill in an op-ed for the Washington Post, she writes, "People in Indiana and across the nation have called me brave, but I'm not any braver than any other physician who would do the right thing when faced with a patient in need. I don't feel brave. I feel anguished, desperate, and angry." Nearly 1,400 healthcare workers from across Indiana signing 2 letters to lawmakers voicing their objections.
Legislating someone else's moral decisions and religious decisions onto everyone else that comes directly into the clinics is hugely problematic for us who are trying to practice medicine.
We are concerned that this is just a harbinger of what is to come, and we are really worried about a national abortion ban.
So this for you goes well beyond Indiana.
Absolutely. Indiana is first, but we are not going to be last.
And given the Republican supermajority here in the state legislature, opponents of any kind of abortion ban say they are fully preparing for a bill to pass, but they hope to see the language evolve in the coming weeks to add as many exemptions as possible. They also point out that they're preparing for the possibility that when the legislature returns for its regular session, they could look to implement even further restrictions. Erin?
Alexandra, thank you very much. And next, the fiancé of the American captured in Ukraine is my guest. Last time we spoke, she was expecting a call from him. We have an update next. And a stark warning about a new arms race that the United States is not winning.
We share this place, we all belong.
It's totally covered in solar, also the side panels, and we have this patented proprietary solar technology which we developed over the last couple of years. And this vehicle here is recharging on average per day 10 miles. In a week it's 70 miles through the sun. Additionally, of course, I have a battery on board. I can recharge it just as a regular electric vehicle, but we have this convenient feature. It's taking away this fear of recharging, this fear of range anxiety, and making it more convenient, energy efficient, and you're saving costs. Energy is coming from the sun for free. And the second pillar is selling and licensing this technology to B2B customers. Trucks, train, buses, camper van. There's huge potential in this market to make the whole logistic industry more greener.
I would describe One World as compelling, inclusive, and original. I want this show to be a place where everyone watching has a stake in the global conversation.
One World with Zain Asher, tonight on CNN.
Tonight, one of 2 Americans found dead in Ukraine, identified as Luke Luzishin. The volunteer soldiers were killed in the Donetsk region on July 18th while fighting with Ukrainian forces. They were reportedly ambushed by Russian tanks. Luke Luzishin's mother saying her son just wanted to help.
We know that he was hit by artillery and he was knocked out, and that 3 men tried to save him. That is even more heartbreaking. My heart is so heavy, it's hard to breathe.
The men belong to the same unit as other missing Americans, Alex Drueke and Andy Tyna-Quinn, who have been held by Russian-linked forces for 47 days now. Out front now, Joy Black, Andy Tyna-Quinn's fiancée. And Joy, I'm glad to have you back. I wish it was under different circumstances, but I'm glad that we're still talking and making sure people know about Andy. I know the State Department called to tell you that 2 Americans who had been fighting with Andy were dead. And they wanted you to know before you heard 2 Americans that it wasn't Andy. You must have felt an incredible sense of relief to get that call, but also a fear. What went through your mind when you heard that news, Joy?
Well, it's always a relief to know, that Andy and Alex are okay, but it was still very heavy to me to know that, more people just trying to, fight for a good cause and defend the innocent have, passed in this conflict. So my heart definitely goes out to their family.
The last time I spoke with you, Joy, you were expecting a call from Andy. Have you spoken with him yet?
Unfortunately, no, they haven't let him call, but I'm choosing not to see that happen. Alex also hasn't called in a few weeks now, but I just choose to look on the bright side that, maybe they just got their message out.
I know that you have a video of Andy. I use the word new because you received it just a few days ago, but we don't know exactly when it was filmed, right? But you just received it a few days ago. I'll play it.
My name is Andy Tyna-Quinn. I am a United States citizen. I was born in Fountain Valley, California, and I currently reside in Hartselle, Alabama.
Joy, do you believe this was recent?
As far as I know, I don't think it's that old. But regardless of when it was shot at, it was probably quite recent. But regardless of that, it was just nice to hear his voice. It's always very hard to see them using him in, ways that they really shouldn't. But I choose not to really pay attention to what he's saying. More so just, get to see him and hear his voice and know that he's okay.
I know that, you also, his personal items were delivered to Bunny Drueke, Alex's mother, by a member of the unit they were with, credit cards, passports, other documents like that. Have you received those items, and what does it mean to hold those tangible items for you?
Yeah, I did receive them. Bunny and her sister came up on Sunday to bring us the package, and it was definitely very, very emotional. I was very, very happy to get his things. I have his engagement ring now, so I don't really let go of that, the one that he actually wore. And I got his Bible and his passport and his wallet. So just things to keep safe. And he also was keeping a small journal with some notes for me in it. So it was definitely very emotional.
That must be, such a, for whatever it's worth, that just some peace to be able to have that. I can only imagine what reading those words must mean to you, Joy. You're in my thoughts, I know, and thoughts of everybody watching. I hope that this story ends with a wonderful reuniting with you and Andy soon. Thank you. And next, world superpowers engaged in a new arms race. Why is the United States lagging behind Russia and China?
I'm Linda Kincaid in Atlanta, and this is CNN.
Business never sleeps. As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, journalist, global market analyst, and host of CNN's First Move.